Hello, real pleasure today to be joined by one of our most distinguished alumni, Marty Scheinman, who is a leading arbitrator, mediator, class of 75 and also MS 76. And I'm also proud to be the Martin Scheinman Professor of Conflict Resolution here at the ILRAAD School, as well as serving as Dean. So a pleasure to see you, Marty.
Nice to see you, and it's my pleasure that you have that name associated to you.
So this is an unusual year. This is a year where unprecedented is probably going to be the word of the year that we all have in our minds as we face the challenges of the COVID-19 pandemic, and we know this is having enormous effects across our society, across our economy. And in these conversations with our alumni, we're trying to understand how it's affecting really this broad swath of our economy, people in different workplaces, different professions, different industries, and try to understand how this is impacting all the different kinds of work that we do in our lives. So I want to start off by asking you about how it's affecting your work and your business. And I know this affects both the work you do as a neutral, as an arbitrator and mediator, but also you have a very successful business that you head up as well, that I'm sure it's affecting that as well. So I'd like to get to both of those questions, but maybe let's start with how it's affecting your work as an arbitrator and as a mediator.
Okay, so I think the short answer is in just about every way, but as we've evolved, less so. And so what I mean by that is we happen to have an arbitration center where a lot of my hearings were conducted. People would come in, we have rooms and breakout rooms. We built this many years ago, and it looks like a big law firm. And for a lot of parties who would rather not go to one side, they came to our office. Well, that's obviously doesn't exist anymore. We now have our people back in the office, but we've had no hearings. We don't allow anybody in. So all of that is stopped. So therefore, what would happen is, how do you replicate that as best you can? And so originally, given my age and my technological skills, I was of the view we could do nothing about that. And I was prodded by a lot of my clients, some of whom you know well, that let's try this thing on Zoom. I think you can do it. It probably would work out, etc. And so I took a little time. I was hesitant to do it. But after a little bit of training, which is not very hard, to be honest, I've been able to do this. And we've done probably 50 to 70 cases now, either arbitrations or mediations on Zoom. Part of how it's changed my thought process, though, and then I'll talk about the details of that, is that I recognize that people are now going to act during these mediations and these arbitrations very different than they would have acted anywhere else. And we just have to accept that as a given. They're under more tension, more stress, and the like. And so that will be incorporated in my thinking, being a little bit more understanding when people go off, being a little understanding when people don't seem to be behaving. Many of my clients are repeat clients that I see all the time. And suddenly they were acting differently. Obviously it also was seeing them in different settings. It's something interesting about having a mediation, for example, when you see a dog in the background or a kid crying. And instead of seeing this as an impediment, I started to embrace it and say to myself, we can change this. And so now what happens is, I've actually commented about this, that in some ways, on some cases, I would argue that this forum is actually better for what we do. I mean, it's just to talk about how it's changed it. So I show up, I invite people in, just like you invited me in today during the Zoom. We put them into a waiting room, just like I would do in a real waiting room. I bring them in one at a time. But one of the things that even in our center, which is probably better than any place in the world, because it was set up exactly to do arbitration and mediation of parties who sometimes don't want to see each other. Sexual harassment cases, race cases, which I do a lot of. There was always this concern of, would they bump into each other when they went to the restroom, when they went to the kitchen, how do you serve people? How do you know that they won't see anybody? Do we put the blinds down? All that's gone now. So what's changed now is, now I put the people in the waiting room, I move them one by one. And frankly, people who are worried about privacy actually feel much more private. Yeah. They have the comfort of being at home. Once I convince them that no one can overhear what you're saying, it's not like
Right.
then. No one's going to bump into you at the restroom. No one's going to see it. You are never going to see that person. That's interesting. And the arbitration side, what I've done is learn how to have the hearings and set up and look like an arbitrator. And of course, there was always a case where we would have to tell witnesses what the rules were. So now the rules include don't have a phone in front of you. Please don't text. You're not allowed to do that because there's been some discussions about whether people are being prodded. And I argue people always could have been prodded. It was the arbitrator's job to make sure that didn't happen. It's my job not to do it. So the reality is, I think that, now I can talk about it later on, and you're going to ask me about how I think how this will evolve, but I will tell you that I'm now persuaded, and I think my clients are persuaded, that this really has not been much of a diminishment, and this is the new norm. Having said that, obviously I miss seeing my people. I'm sitting in a home that I own out in the East End of Long Island. This is where I've been for all intents and purposes for the last 6 months. I've literally only left, I think, 5 days in those 6 months. I've not had a single in-person hearing. I've had colleagues who've had in-person hearings, and then I've heard stories of they found out that one of the people was positive, and even though they weren't positive, if you're going to be a responsive citizen, you then have to say, I'm out of it for 14 days.
Right.
And so I say to people, the reason I'm not going to have hearings is not because I'm actually worried about getting sick. I'm not going to do it because the only hearing you're going to have with me is I'm going to wear a mask and you're all going to wear masks. And that is not as facilitating to have a good arbitration or have a good mediation. Every person I know who is hesitant to do this, I said, look, try it. If you don't think it's good, we'll cancel it right now. I will not charge you for the day. And we'll reschedule it in person, next year, hopefully. And every single person without exception has said to me, there was no difference or it was better. And that's what's interesting. Last comment I make, my new opening is when I tell people, especially in a mediation, I'll say about if you don't know the technology, I promise you, if the case doesn't settle, it's because of the quality of the mediator, not because the quality of the platform.
Right.
My shortcoming, not that. And so I would suggest that success rate alike. In arbitrations, you have to be a little bit more facile because you want to be able to watch the witness, watch the advocates and the like. At first, this was a little cumbersome, but now that I've done it repeatedly, I'm telling you, I don't see anything else. Now, and I've tried to also, last comment about this, is it's affected it, but I've tried to make this as normative as possible. I wear a shirt and tie. I want people to realize it's just as serious, but I'm not troubled that they're going to be interrupted because they're home by their child. I'm not troubled that something else is going to do it. We're not troubled that we're going to have to break so you can eat. All the things that you can just do and accommodate. So I think my business has been affected. I don't think it's been negative. More importantly, the parties I serve don't think so. And I believe that it's a new tool that probably would not exist, which I'll comment about later.
Yeah, I think that's really striking, the point you mentioned about people feeling more comfortable in their own homes, because that's one of the things we think about in terms of the theory of dispute resolution is control of the place and the location in which you do dispute resolution. I've often thought that individuals, if you're a working class individual who's not used to being in a fancy law firm, and then you have to go into that venue to do your hearing, it's going to be more challenging for you because other people who are there are used to being in that venue. They're in kind of their home turf, and maybe this is going to improve things for us.
I think that's incredibly insightful. One of the mistakes that advocates make, even in regular cases, is they tell their clients or witnesses to look a certain way because they think that that's what they have to project. But what comes off to the neutral is it's insincere. Yeah. It's a charade. It's a facade, and it doesn't make somebody more persuasive. Seeing someone who feels comfortable in their skin is not only going to make the process better, but in my job, especially when I'm mediating, when I need to persuade people to change their positions, because otherwise there wouldn't be an impasse, right? I have to say to them, I'm looking at them in the eye, and I am able to look in the eye. I'm looking at you now, but normally I'm looking right at the person there. I wouldn't be looking at myself. Like if I look at you, I can see everything about you. I can't see. So I think you're absolutely right. And the only comment I would make aside, I am in control because I can determine where you're going to go. I can make sure, I could say, I want to meet with you alone, and I can pull you into a separate breakout room. So I have, and frankly, there's no waiting. When you're in that room alone and you're having a caucus and you want me, you just put a note, I know to come in. So I do think I'm in control. I am what they call the administrator, but I'm the administrator in person. So I don't think that's much different.
Yeah. So this is a number of changes that affect how you do your work as an arbitrator mediator, but you're also owner of a business. You have employees that you're responsible for. And I think everybody who's has employees underneath them in this time has had to deal with a lot of challenges in terms of the impact on their own organization, their own employees. So what are you doing to help your organization?
So we have two businesses that we run. We have a claims administration business that is an outreach of my mutual work, where we administer these huge class settlements that you read about, some of which I've mediated or arbitrated, some of which my colleagues have done or the courts have. So what I've done there is it's an interesting struggle that I think every business person must be talking about when they speak to you, which is, traditionally, I'm of the view that the reason we built this fancy office where we have everybody, we built it, is because we wanted a place where everybody would be. And so one was, is that really right? You know, you hear Google and you hear Facebook, and every young person tells you about Twitter, says you don't have to ever come back in. So you have to balance that. What I think has been changed for me is to make a real assessment about who really does need to be there and who does not. And given the fact that we all want to lessen the concentration of people, I mean, interestingly enough, when we built this building, which I think is a good vignette, we had a bullpen, but I also had a lot of offices, because I was used to offices, not just for the ownership, but also for a lot of people. And I remember, 8-10 months ago saying, I wonder if this was really smart. Perhaps I should have built just a huge bullpen. We have a bullpen, I think, for 12 people, and we have offices for 14, 18 people.
Yeah.
So the point was, now, unbelievable, obviously everyone's in an office. So the irony is, it's made you sort of think about that. We've spent a fortune on protective equipment. Remember, as an arbitrator, I'm the arbitrator in healthcare. So hospitals, nursing homes, home health, that's one of my largest clients, and schools and transit. So you can imagine what's going on in my practice, plus all the discrimination in cases I do as an employment and commercial cases. But so I've tried to apply what I've learned from people, watching them. And what do people really have to be in? How do you comfort them? People, look, as an arbitrator, I would accept the fact that someone might not come to work having nothing to do with actually physically having COVID, but because they're fearful of having COVID, because of the emotional distress. So my own workers will say, I'm afraid of being in because I have some compromised immunity, or I live with my mother or someone else. So what I've done is what everybody else has done. Now, I do in our business, because we concluded in the administration business, especially, and the other one we run is a real estate business where we own properties that we manage ourselves, is I said, in the real estate business, you got to be there. Because the reality is, you have to respond to your tenants. Those tenants have needs. They're emotional. I mean, candidly, for the first time, some people who have lived in our buildings for years said, it's really noisy. I'm saying it's noisy. You've been living there for 11 years. What? And I realized it has nothing to do with the noise. It's just that their sensitivities are higher. Their nerves are frayed. And rather than react in a beg way, say, okay, let's see what we can do to help.
Yeah.
And that's what we've taught our people to do, to be more in the customer service people. In the administrative people, I've said, look, some of you are not going to come in. It's not fair that everybody else has to come in. So we got to find a balance to do it. And what we've done, since we don't have any arbitration hearings, all the conference rooms have been converted into the offices for the people who didn't have offices. So now everybody has an office. You walk in, everybody's, 15 feet away from each other. And, and the only other thing you are a little bit of a father figure. When I go, I'm not in there very often, but when I'm in, I admonish, you got to wear a mask. I don't care if you don't feel comfortable wearing a mask. I wear a mask, and I don't like it any more than you like it. And I'm not as attractive as you, so mask with me really looks bad. And so you got to do that. And it sounds a little annoying, but everybody rolls their eyes. And, we haven't gotten to the point of arguing about discipline, but I'm like, this is really not you can tell me that when you want to have lunch, you can tell me when you want to start, you can tell me when you want to leave, you can tell me when you want a day off. You can't tell me you're coming to work and you're not going to wear a mask. That is, I don't care.
Yeah.
Dr. Fauci went to Cornell. We're going to accept Dr. Fauci's version. We're wearing masks. So, but that's part of what's different. But again, I realize the person who doesn't want to wear a mask often isn't about the mask. It's about everything else that this is reminding them that there's no respite even at work from the fears they're having about it. Now, lastly, I've had more meetings than ever before to reassure people financially that, it's my job to keep you employed. We did have a couple of senior people who took less money. We're making less money. But other than that, we had one person who was sort of not sure about it. It was a performance area, was asking me, would I commit that they would have a job in a few years? I said, I can't, that's not going to work. So, well, then I would prefer to leave now. I said, God bless you, you can do what you want. But we've been very fortunate. Obviously, we took the receptionist and said, there's no one's allowed in the building.
Right.
So we'll find something else for you to do. And he's actually doing well in a different job. I think this is what we've had to do. I've learned from my colleagues, my brothers in construction. He builds offices like the law firms are talking about. How are you doing it? I have friends where I think there's much more discussion amongst, I don't want to call us CEOs, but leaders to talk about this. Even the arbitrators are talking to each other about things that no one would ever ask each other at this point. I'm doing this for over 40 years. Yeah. How do you conduct a hearing? Well, I'll ask somebody how you're conducting a hearing. And that's probably pretty good. That's a good result, that we're more communicative. And we're also better able to say, not only is it unprecedented, I really don't have any idea how to handle this.
Yeah.
So, and I'll look literally, as you know, I've had some time now to listen into some of our broadcasts that ILR is putting on, right, to hear what other people are doing, the hospitality people, what they're talking about. You learn a lot about it, and best practices, I think, is, I'm not as confident as I was 8 months ago that everything about these businesses I'm perfectly capable of handling. Now I would acknowledge there's some of this stuff I have to learn about.
Yeah.
So I think that's a difference.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting. We have been doing a lot of these webinars and trying to keep these discussions going and ideas coming out. But we're learning from everybody else's experience too. I mean, just what you're saying just now about how you're dealing your own business. I'm dealing with the same stuff with the ILR school and thinking about what's the core of the educational experience on campus that we need to do in person, and what can we do remotely, and how do you blend the two together to achieve what you want to achieve, which is provide an excellent education for the students and provide as much of an on-campus experience as you can, given the public health limitations that we're all dealing with. So
But I would say ILR is uniquely positioned on this, and this is not like an advertisement. You've been doing blended learning for years. This is, when people say to me, do you know what blended learning is? I sort of laugh. Yeah. I said, yeah, they've been doing it for 5, 6, 7 years and have invested an enormous amount of financial and human resources in making the experience better for our clients, because our clients and our students are not just resident students. You have students all over the world, literally. So you've been ahead of that. One other comment I should have made before about changing business is I don't like to travel. I'm a bad flyer. Right. But now I take cases with people in Europe. One other comment I should make about changing it, when you're mediating, occasionally the main person is not there. The CEO, the insurance company, they're not there. And usually, it'll take me a couple of days to talk to them, and I'll say, plus, I wish they could hear from your mouth rather than me telling them what you said. I say, call them up. Now, suddenly, next thing you know, the other day, I had a person who, the person gets up, he looks like he's tired, he's in Singapore. Next thing I know, he's in the room. You could never have done that in reality. And so California, Florida, Texas, Chicago, you know me pretty well, Alex. Yeah. I always said no, no, no. Right. Now I say, if you're willing to do it this way. So it's a new opportunity that we hadn't really thought of. I had never thought about it. I never thought that there was a way that I could say to somebody, sure, I would take that case, even though one side's in Paris and one side's in LA. So that's an interesting change also. But again, ILR was ahead of its time on this, and that's why I learned a lot of this.
Yeah, I mean, I think one advantage we've had pivoting to online education is we've had kind of infrastructure. We've got people with the technical expertise, like people supporting this this Zoom recording, who've got expertise, who can walk us through it, and we had them in place so that when we went to the online teaching, we were ready to go. And I think it's a good lesson of kind of being prepared for a future that is uncertain.
So I have two comments about that. One, even after we went back, we had a flood in the office. And suddenly it was a sprinkler broke in a brand new building. Anyway, but that's life. But the point was we could now immediately say, all right, we'll go back to remote because we knew how to do it. It wasn't like what normally I would have sleepless nights. The only disadvantage I want to say, and I want everybody to think about this a little bit.
Yeah.
You know, we all know that juries come in on Fridays because they don't want to spend the weekend.
Right,
well,
right.
There comes a time in a mediation and sometimes in an arbitration where you can see it tends to get a little bit more telescope because people want to go home, which is also useful because they, What I have found here, though, since people do not have to travel home, they're willing to get to their bottom lines a lot later.
Yeah, yeah.
Suddenly it's Friday, it's 8 o'clock at night. It's like, all right already. And we're arguing over $50,000. And I'm realizing they're thinking, well, if I was in the city and I had to travel my home, on a busy day, that would take an hour and a half. I have another hour and a half.
Yeah.
So that's something that we have to figure out, and I have to figure out how to make sure that people aren't on 24/7, not only for legal reasons, but for moral reasons and for you know, the balance that we all preach about work, life, private life balancing. This is another thing that we have to figure out, that I have figured out a little, but not much. But I will tell you, while we get on Friday, we get cases done earlier still because people want to be done. They will be willing to go to 6 when often I would settle at 4. That's one of my insights that no one's really thought about.
So it feels at times like we've been in this for years, even though it's been 5 months, and we know it's going to go on for a while longer. I mean, there's good progress being made on these vaccines, but you know, it takes time to test. But eventually, hopefully, we're going to get out of this sometime, you know, hopefully next year, and we'll start to return to more normal life. But where do you see things going in the future? What's going to last from this experience? How will things change going forward? What's going to go back to normal? What do you think is going to be different in the future?
Well, first, your premise, I'm not sure I subscribe to. I don't think we're going to be out of this as quickly. I mean, I remind people I'm 67 years old. And when I was young, we took 2 polio vaccinations because they weren't sure about the efficacy of either of them yet. So it took a long time till there was a consensus in the scientific community. This is the one that your kids got. And this is the one that other people's grandchildren are getting. So that's that. Candidly, I don't see any reason why we are, as you know, remember, I live in the New York metropolitan area. It seems to me getting back to normalcy for that could be 5 or 10 years, but even just getting back to where we feel comfortable being in a building and everybody doesn't look at each other and doesn't have to worry about being 6 feet away. There's nothing that I've learned during this. And again, having the advantage of being on the board of trustees and Weill Cornell and listening to the doctors, 12 months from now, in my view, is going to look just like it is today. I hope I'm wrong, but that's what I think. And if you said to me, you know, what's the over and under? I say it could be more than 12 months. That doesn't mean we won't have some of these antivirals, because we will. And it doesn't mean we won't have some evidence on this. But the kind of thing people are talking about where they feel relieved and it's all done, I just think is longer. In light of that, I'm planning for the new norm, being that one, it's not just it used to be like this and why don't you try like it used to be when we did it virtually, but this blended kind of practice is what's going to happen. So I think that everybody, look, when you mediate, you get paid by the hour. The amount of money that people will save in a process where people not having to travel, both for the hourly rates, for lawyers, the loss of time with people, the inconvenience, the travel, to have someone fly in from a city and the like. I don't believe there's any doubt that when people are now quantifying this, they're going to say it makes good business reason not to have somebody do it. Look how many meetings you've done in your life as the dean, even for these years, when you went to visit with someone that you needed to visit with, and the assumption was I can visit with 3 people if I'm in Chicago. Right. Now, theoretically, you can visit with 5 people or 6 people or 7 people, and they'll be just as happy to visit with each of us when they realize it's not a 4-hour commitment, it's an hour commitment.
Yeah.
And so that's the same thing of being a neutral, where, so one, I can be more available time-wise. Somebody says, can you fit me in? This is really important. I say, would you mind starting at 8:30 in the morning? And the answer is people now say, sure. Because at 8:30 in the morning, they were already on the road traveling, so they're willing to put on whatever their work clothes are. Right. So I think that will stay. I think the other component is people will trust technology more, because if I can be persuaded about it, and the most, I'll tell 2 stories about that, all of which make fun of me. The day that I went from AOL to Gmail, and my kind of thing was my children all rejoiced. But the best part was during this, I get a call from a very well-known law firm. I won't tell you what it is. About a week after I do a Zoom, and he says, "Are you Mr. Scheinman?" "Yes, I'm so-and-so, the head of technology for this law firm." "Yes. I was hoping that maybe you could teach me so I could teach the lawyers about Zoom." I said, I need to videotape this, because no one will ever believe that I am now some expert in technology. But the fact that I can do it means literally there is no one in the world who lacks the capacity. And people will incorporate it. They'll be more trusting. You can actually watch them. And I've got notes afterwards, emails after saying, I thought that this whole thing was going to be awful. Turns out it was fine. And you know something? I didn't have to drive 2 hours. I didn't have to ask a witness who sits outside for 5 minutes in a grievance arbitration, who will sit there for a whole day for 5 minutes of testimony. Yeah. What a waste of time. Now, you know what we can do? We can send him or her an email. We can tell them it's going to be at 1:15. We can bring them in at 1:15, and they can go back to their lives at 1:25. Yeah. That is an enormously successful, efficient way to do it, and no one's going to complain about that.
Yeah.
And someone said to me, "Well, I complain because I come to New York. I would like to go to a fancy restaurant." I said, "Okay, well, until we have the fancy restaurants open, you're not going to really want to come to New York right now." So that's the only, other than the social, recreational value of traveling, I don't think professional travel, which is a big impact in our lives, is going to be the same.
Yeah, I totally agree on that. My schedule has now completely changed for the year.
And do you think you're less effective?
No, I think I'm just as effective. In fact, I can reach out to people that would have been hard to reach out to otherwise for exactly that ability. I can fit into their schedule now. I don't have to spend 2 days and try and make it work. Just wait till they're available.
And to me, and I'm just telling you, since all of us have learned how to value time more, my wife, who's a therapist, says 2020, the year that time stopped, which is a good way to think about it. But since we're all thinking about time and we're all thinking about our, what life's going to look like, and everybody's obviously thought more about their own mortality, which is inevitable in these kinds of situations. Every person, anyone that says he or she isn't, is not being truthful with themselves or with you. Yeah. We're going to want to be more efficient. We're not going to want to waste time on things that are unnecessary. I have a colleague who's a client he says, "The thing I hate about negotiations is all you do is kill time."
Yeah.
That's his comment. He says, "We kill time, and I never get that time back." And I think a lot about that with that comment, and think, we don't need to do that anymore. Or we can limit that. We can tell people. Now, of course, we have to make sure everybody has good technology. We have to make sure everybody has good broadband. People not understanding why the fact that so much of the country doesn't have broadband, how much it makes them not part of society, is really an absence of what we're experiencing right now. They don't get it. People say, "What's the big deal?" I said, because they're not going to be, it's almost like saying to someone, "You don't speak any language that we can communicate with." That's not useful. So that's why we need them all, everybody, to have this, which is why it should be part of our national, priority.
Yeah. Yeah, I think one of the lessons from this is the adaptability of organizations, that people and their businesses have adapted. And if we are, and I think, I wouldn't be surprised if you're correct that this is a slow recovery. But then the key is, as a society, can we adapt? Can we be resilient and gradually adapt as a society to this, and be successful?
And I think the answer is yes. That doesn't mean that it's going to be tough to be in real estate. It's going to be a little tough to be in hospitality, but we're going to find different ways to do it. Look, there's no question that we'll innovate our ways into different things. But candidly, someone said to me the other day, other than the disruption, what is the optimal size of Chicago? What is the optimal size of New York City? Maybe it's not 8 million people. Maybe it's 7 million people. I don't know. I'm not an urban planner. I'm not a sociologist, and nor am I a psychologist. But the theory would have been beforehand: if you're not in those places, you're not in the game. If you want to make it there, you can make it anywhere. Well, the answer is you can probably be in Austin, Texas, and be in the game at the same moment in Ithaca, New York, or Trumansburg, New York, and be in the game and be just as significant and just as important to that organization, and also have the same kind of professional worth that you might have been afraid of if you sort of took yourself out of the fray. I don't think you have to take yourself out of the fray. That's it. I mean, I know senior partners in law firms who would be inconceivable to me that wouldn't be in their offices 6 days a week are now not doing that.
So I think that's a really positive, hopeful note to end on. This is a tough time, but the resilience of people and organizations and our society is something that hopefully will carry us through this. And if we all pull together, I think there is a reason to have some optimism about the future. So thank you for the.
I was going to add, and this is really just a sort of an appeal to what we do. And there will always be conflict. There will always need people who need to help resolve conflict. And the most facile ones at understanding that conflict will be different here, and that we should be more aware of people's mental states besides their physical states. Those are going to be the organizations, the advocates, the neutrals that are best able to serve the parties, which is what we're all in this to do.
Absolutely. And I think the enduring skills that our students learn at ILR, I think, are going to continue to be as important as ever in this time.
More important.
More important. Agreed. Great. Thank you, Marty.
Take care. Good luck, everybody.
Take care.
Thank you. Bye-bye.